Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Build Back Better expert panel. My name is Michelle Chang, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy at the Economic Development Administration. We are so excited that so many of you have joined us today. I know you can't see because we are not in person, but if we were in person, this would be a packed house. We have well over 1,400 people joining us today, so we're very excited for all the excitement around this program and for the exciting panel that we have today. As many of you know, we are now in the final weeks before the first deadline for phase 1 of the Build Back Better Regional Challenge. That first deadline is October 19th. For those that have been following closely, we have done a series of webinars, office hours. We've posted a number of resources, including FAQs, recorded webinars, one-pagers, all to provide you the information you need to be successful in this challenge. Today, we're bringing you a special event to hear directly from industry experts on how they think about cluster development. We hope this helps you to think about ways to make your applications even better and stronger. Please note that any ideas presented today are just that. They are ideas. They are not necessary for a successful application. So take what you like, throw away what you don't. This is all to help you put together the best proposal for your application. And with that, before we get started today, I do want to introduce a new member of our team. We have been so excited that this week, Scott Andes has joined us as the Build Back Better Regional Challenge Team Lead. He comes to us with a wealth of knowledge on cluster development, and we're thrilled to have him, and he's just brought so much energy and excitement to our team in this 1 week. So before we get started, I'm going to hand this over to Scott to introduce himself.
Great. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. Thrilled to, I guess, I can't see you, but by the numbers, I'm thrilled at how many participants across the country are interested. As Michelle said, my name's Scott. I'm the program lead for the Build Back Better regional competition. Just excited to be here. I think we're just 2 weeks to go. There clearly is a ton of energy around the country, and we're thrilled to see what you all bring in. By way of just very quick background, I previously was at Carnegie Mellon University, and before that led a program at the National League of Cities that worked with over 100 regions on entrepreneurship and economic development programming. Previous to that, I was at the Brookings Institution and other think tanks for about a decade, focused on regional clusters and innovation-based economic development. I absolutely think that this competition is a phenomenal opportunity to propel dozens of communities forward. And before I turn it back over to Michelle for this amazing panel, I just wanted to address one small question that seemed to be coming up quite a bit as you round into your last 2 weeks. One thing that has really come up is how detailed do the projects need to be in phase 1? And just to be clear, we are not expecting finalized projects planning in phase 1. Phase 1 is genuinely about the strength of the cluster. Have you identified your regional assets? Is there an industry-driven problem statement? And most importantly, tell us about the team. Tell us really about how this coalition can actually capitalize and execute on your vision over the next 5 years. So ultimately, phase 1 is really about who you are and what teams you bring to the table and why your cluster is a strength, while phase 2 is about the how and the what. With that, let me turn it back over to Michelle, and I'm excited to hear from this extraordinary panel. Thanks, Michelle.
Great. Thanks so much, Scott. And with that, I'm excited to announce our Assistant Secretary and introduce you to Alejandra Castillo, who will be our moderator today. For those who don't know Alejandra, she is an experienced public administrator who previously served as the National Director of the Department of Commerce's Minority Business Development Agency. She also held many senior policy positions at the White House and the International Trade Administration. Ms. Castillo is also a first-generation American of Dominican descent. As the head of the Economic Development Administration, she is responsible for fulfilling the agency's mission of leading the federal economic development agenda, including overseeing the implementation of the $3 billion in economic development funding appropriated as part of President Biden's American Rescue Plan. With that, I'll turn this over to our Assistant Secretary, Alejandra Castillo.
Michelle, thank you very much, and thank you for the flexibility as we tackle some of the technical challenges. But nonetheless, this is exciting time. It's exciting time for many reasons. One is We have a challenge that the president has given us, which is to build back better. And under that agenda, we want to make sure that we are not only tackling the issues in front of us as we recover from this pandemic, but more importantly, as we start to build that arc of the future. And you've heard many times of the conversation on regional economic development. So we're going to tackle that as well. But let me once again thank our panelists. Karen Mills, former SBA administrator and senior fellow at Harvard Business School. Brett Theodos, senior fellow and director of the Community Economic Development Hub at the Urban Institute. And Ronnie Chatterji, chief economist at the U.S. Department of Commerce, which will all engage. So we're going to, as we mentioned when we were preparing for this panel, let's, Karen, let's suspend a bit the protocol and just go right in if you don't mind, because we want to make sure that we maximize this time that we have together. So we've heard a lot about economic clusters. We talk about regional economic development. You have a lot of experience on that. Can you kind of dispel the myth or at least give us some granularity and understanding of what does that all mean?
Well, thank you very much. And congratulations on running this incredible program. I am so delighted that the Build Back Better agenda, and in particular this cluster initiative, is really coming, to fruition and getting implemented in the very near term. The reason is that clusters are one of the most powerful regional economic development tools that exist, and also one of the most cost-effective. And I can tell you all the academic citations. Maybe I'll leave that for Ronnie Chatterji, my economist colleague here on the panel. But it has been well-defined and proven that regional economic clusters have an important role in driving job creation and driving innovation, that they are more resilient to downturns. And they're very good for the supply chain, which we have a number of issues in supply chains right now. But I want to just tell instead a personal story about how I came to realize the importance of regional clusters. In 2008, before I ended up running the Small Business Administration in the Obama time period, I was in the great state of Maine, and the Naval Air Station in my town went on the base closure list. And we were going to lose thousands of jobs, really the whole livelihood. And the governor said to me, you need to do something to help. And what we ended up doing was creating a cluster of the Maine boat builders and the Composite Technology Center of the University of Maine in order to create faster boats. Now, Maine has been building boats for 400 years, but the new technology, the innovation from the university combined with the small business boat builders and the Department of Labor's grant that allowed us to train the workforce in building composites, which is kind of a complicated process, made a magical solution. And today, on the grounds of that Naval Air Station, there are composite companies. And I learned from this how powerful it is when you get a coalition together to really drive an economic regional solution around a cluster. I wrote a paper for Brookings, which I think the organizers are going to put in the chat, about this. And when I got the job at the SBA, I figured I actually had to implement what I had written about. We did 56 clusters in the first couple of years, and some of them are really powerful local, regional engines of economic growth today. So I would say, this is quite a beneficial investment in the future. And to all of you out there who are going to apply, I'm delighted that there is this funding available and this interest, because I think it can have a powerful result.
So Karen, thank you for that story, for that very real story, I should say. But you also talked about two very interesting concepts as well. You mentioned supply chain, you mentioned workforce, and I'll say the third one, you also mentioned the issue of technology and innovation in terms of advanced materials and composites. So I want to park that, because I think that that's going to be very critical as participants look at how do they put together their applications and their proposals. So Brent, let me just go to you in a minute, because as you know, EDA has taken a look at its investment priorities, and one that's very near and dear to my heart is the issue of equity. A lot of the research has focused on equity-related issues, particularly in urban areas related to things like neighborhood change, geographical mobility. Can you talk to us a bit about how applicants should think about equity in this context? As places they build out their regional growth clusters, how should they make sure that their most disadvantaged and underserved populations are brought along and shared in this growth?
Great, thanks. And it's a terrific question, and one that I think is really important to grapple with. So it will surprise no one on this webinar that we're in an era that really is an all-time high in terms of many markers of inequality. And we certainly see that across people groups, for example, by race and ethnicity, but that also manifests itself across place. And so as we think in terms of the EDA and its priorities and its abilities to act and to influence, it really is then across place that we begin to think and wonder what it is that we can do that's most effective with regards to addressing some of these equity concerns. And unfortunately, economic development has had, I'd say, an outdated, but still carries with it something of a bad rap, that it's more interested in growing wealth for those who already have it in communities. And that's certainly not true for the EDA programs or for this challenge, but it does mean it's incumbent upon us to articulate clearly how it is that what we're doing is growing wealth broadly. And equity can mean different things in different communities. Our country is highly diverse in every regard. And so equity in one community really doesn't necessarily apply that well or translate that well to another, but it does mean something in most communities. And even if it takes a somewhat different form, it probably means something about how broadly wealth is held. It means something about growing and expanding those who own businesses and seeing that those businesses thrive and succeed. It could incorporate things like, do employees get an ownership share in those businesses? It could certainly include things like job quality. And it probably should be thinking about how the benefits of a project accrue to a broader community, yes, through tax base, but even through other means, beyond those just that are accruing to an immediate project itself. And it should always, in that sense, be thinking about communities of need as a focal point for investments. So I think what I want to encourage folks to take away is really to stress their theory of change. What really do you think this investment will accomplish? For whom? And how will it be catalytic? I know that term can be overused, but I think the EDA is really interested in not just a project to do a project, but a project that really results in some resounding and redounding benefits.
I really like that, Brett, in terms of stressing the theory of change. And the fact that you said equity is not does not have just one definition. It can be defined in various communities in different ways. So at the end of the day, I would also invite folks to look at EDA's investment priorities so that you can really take a look at the 7 drivers of how we're making decisions in so many different ways. But thank you for that response. I want to turn now to Ronnie and first of all, thank you for the work that you do, but also invite you as our chief economist at the Department of Commerce to give us some context. Economists are increasingly interested in place-based policies as an important tool in the current and future economic climate. Why does the country need things like the Build Back Better challenge? And can you talk about any important research that you've done or seen on successful programs?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Assistant Secretary, for inviting me here, as well as it's great to be with Karen Mills, an old friend of mine from the Obama administration and beyond, and Brett Theodos, a great expert on this work as well. 1,680 people are on this chat, so one of the only good things about doing this on a virtual setting is that I'm totally much less nervous than if all 1,680 of you were in front of me. So thanks for joining us. I really see each of the names on this list of participants as an architect of the future. When you think about Build Back Better, the idea has always been that the best ideas were going to come from the local areas, that we were going to come up with great ideas through programs like this, with EDA funding, through grants, to build back in a regional and localized way, with the best ideas coming from the folks who are on this call. So I'm just honored to be here, and I can share a little bit about kind of what the economic evidence is. As the chief economist at the Department of Commerce, I work on a wide variety of issues, including supply chains that Karen mentioned, but also regional economic development. During the Obama administration with Karen, I worked on something called the I-6 Challenge, which I spent a lot of time on and was really passionate about. The 6 at that point stood for $6 million. And I just want to emphasize to folks the tremendous opportunity of these programs we're talking about. These are historic investments in the United States of America through our regional economies. And as hard as we worked on those programs in the Obama administration days, these are much larger, much more historic, and much more transformative in our ability to really drive regional economic development. So it's one of the reasons I'm excited to be here. I mean, this goes deep in American history. Think about the Tennessee Valley Authority that Franklin Delano Roosevelt launched during the Great Depression. The jobs created in manufacturing by TVA were not just created when the money was flowing during the Depression, but years afterwards. And economic research shows that the spillover effects, the follow-on effects of the TVA lasted far after the money running out. That's a huge opportunity for regional development. So it's not just the initial funds, it's what happens afterwards. You see the same thing in the Boston, Massachusetts area. During World War II, a lot of grants came from the government to Boston, Massachusetts for defense-related needs. The spillovers and the follow-on effects from those investments powered Boston into the 50s and 60s. And it went on. In the post-World War II era, I'm from North Carolina, our Research Triangle Park was founded during the 1960s with IBM and a set of other anchor tenants, and transformed a region that was based on textile, tobacco, furniture to one that's based on biotechnology, education, and software. So the cluster story can be seen all around the United States. The economic evidence has been incredibly strong. And I agree with you, Assistant Secretary Castillo, that a lot of economists are now turning their attention to how we can do regional economic development better. And what I want to say about this EDA team that you're leading, that I've been so pleased to work with, is that they're so interested in building that kind of evidence and those best practices into the way they design the programs, both in terms of the program procedures and guidelines, but also in terms of the technical assistance that they provide to the folks who are participating. And that is going to be a fantastic way to make sure this program is even more successful. And I hope that everyone on this call will take the opportunity to participate in the program, and glad to answer more questions or take some comments on this as well.
I very much appreciate giving us some very concrete examples of how this has worked in the past. And I hope that 20 years from now, when we look back at this moment in time, we will be able to identify those great successes that came about from this Build Back Better challenge. But I'm also very much want to focus on what you said multiple times, which is that spillover effect. We're looking at not just, again, what's happening in front of us, how we do the architect of the future, but also making sure that even after the dollars have already been spent, how does that multiplier effect or spillover effect continues to happen? I'm going to go back and ask Karen Mills another set of questions, and I would like to know, Karen, how should regions think about making sure that the right people are participating? Part of what the Build Back Better Challenge does is really invite collaboration and cooperation from a number of stakeholders. And this is going to be important, especially as these proposals are executed. So what advice or guidance would you give the 1,600 folks that are on this call today?
Well, Alejandra, I'm so pleased you're talking about the people, because in terms of clusters, the people who have a seat at the table turn out to be a critical component that differentiates the success from the failure. And it turns out that something we call cross-sector collaboration is essential for a successful cluster. In other words, you want to have business at the table, but that's not enough. Big business and small business. You have to have education. For instance, the community college has to be there for the training aspect, or the K through 12 piece, depending on what the cluster is looking at. You need government, because very often there are permits or regulations or support that's required. And if you don't have the community at the table, you end up not having an integration with all levels and aspects of your environment, and you can leave some of the groups out, which tends to have a detrimental effect. So thinking very carefully about who gets a seat at the table is critical. And as you know, leadership and collaboration is tough work. So the key to it is to really define what's the outcome you're trying to achieve. And if you really think carefully about how you want to put innovation together with job creation, together with economic opportunity and skills, building skills, then make sure you have the entities at the table who can deliver each one of those. And in the application, I would imagine you would want people to be explicit about who those groups are and what role they might play. When we get our cities together at Harvard Business School, where I am now, we do a summer boot camp for 16 different cities. And the theme of this, it's called the Young American Leaders Program, is cross-sector collaboration, exactly what we're talking about here, that no one group can solve the problems in today's regions. But together, if you have an effective cross-sector collaboration, you can deliver the results. So the YALPers, we call them, the Young American Leaders. I know a lot of you are out there. I know a lot of you are listening right now with some great cross-sector collaborations. Perhaps they will make very good applications for this program.
And thank you for that. We too have talked about the public sector, the private sector, educational institutions, nonprofits, philanthropy. So I'm glad that you brought that whole family together, because it is that collaboration and partnership that's really going to make each of the applications strong, but more importantly, each of the ideas to really flourish. I want to go back to Brett, if I can. A lot of your work focuses on evaluation of place-based initiatives. How would you encourage applicants to think about tracking their progress over the 5-year duration of the grants period of performance? And how would that differ, if at all? 10 years, 20 years. In the federal government, we are custodians of taxpayer dollars. So we want to make sure that applicants can also talk to us about metrics and performance and execution. So what would you say to this incredible group of people that are listening to us today?
Also a great question. And I love the inclusion of 20 years as part of this, because we need to think in 5-year increments, but we also need to think about 20-year increments. And I love the idea of the federal government as a long-term partner to the well-rooted local work that really does take time. Turning an entire region, its economy, or it's more like turning a battleship than it is like turning a jet ski. And this isn't to say that all your regions need turning. Some of them are really on the right trajectory and just need extra lift. But it is to say that it is really hard work, the work of place-based change. It's really hard. Economies are complex. And communities are complex, much more complex than I think we always like to acknowledge. And there are long-running factors like automation, for example, as well as short-term factors like COVID illustrates, that literally are moving the ground underneath us while we are trying to understand and adapt to it. And so, part of the challenge too is often we're trying to accomplish the work of this place-based change, this regional change, for pennies on the dollar, pennies of subsidy to support dollars of need. And that's what's exciting about this initiative and its size and its scale and the ability to go big. But what does that mean in practicality in terms of what we're going to be tracking? We're certainly going to be looking at things like increasing investment. Again, I want to emphasize, not just from this one immediate project or deal, but more broadly in spillover. We're going to think about increasing jobs. We're going to think about increasing firms. We're going to think about growing incomes. Those are going to be some key metrics by which we understand our success. And bridging back to that equity question, we're going to bring a lens to it that asks, did we do this just on average, or did we accomplish this more universally across groups and across places? But really, it also can relate to institutional outcomes. So some of the build to scale efforts, for example, have really resulted in denser ecosystems, denser groups of activity that are doing equity investment. Just very one specific example of the kind of institution building that can also emerge from this. But above all of this is the question of how does this project, this activity, this deal lead to the next, and to the next, and to the next, in a progression that really results in positive change.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you honed in on the 20-year of evaluation and analysis. Indeed, there are tranches of time that we have to consider. Obviously, the life of the grant, but again, going back to Ronnie's point, what's that spillover, and how will it impact in a much longer continuum? So very much looking at that, and going back to the issues of metrics, right? How will we measure success? What does, as it was said before, what does success look like? And painting that picture is going to be also very, very crucial. So thank you for that. Ronnie, I'm going to go back to you and say, regional clusters come in all sizes and shapes. However, we have heard that some rural communities have had a hard time seeing how they would fit into a cluster, since their communities are so dispersed. How would you encourage rural communities to think about their involvement and their participation in either a larger regional cluster or leading a smaller regional cluster? How could the Build Back Better challenge benefit them?
Well, it's a great point. I mean, studying the example of my state of North Carolina, the Research Triangle Park was a success story. But at the same time, over that same period, a lot of our smaller towns and rural areas in North Carolina did not see that same level of economic growth. And that's a really important point, and one that we're really trying to build into how we think about Build Back Better and all the work that EDA is doing. For rural areas, I think there's a few important connections to keep in mind. One, I want to bring in both what Karen and Brett said, which is thinking about your network. If all of us were to pick up our phone right now and look at our contact list, it would be too determined by where we went to school, where we live, the neighborhood we're in, where our kids go to school, where we go to church. Our networks are getting too narrow, and it allows us sometimes to have tunnel vision how we're doing the planning. And so no matter where you are and where you live, you need to find a way to expand that network, and bringing more people to the table is one way to do that. You're going to need a team to get this done, and I think that's something that all the panelists would agree on. So if you're in a rural area, an urban area, somewhere in between, you got to get together with a team. No one person can do this themselves, even a fantastic multi-sector leader who has connections to all the different sectors that Karen mentioned. That's also going to be really important on the equity side, no matter where you are. And so to Brett's points, basically expanding the network and who's at the table will be really important in how rural areas do this as well as urban. For rural specifically, though, a lot of rural areas in the United States are connected through the supply chains that Karen talked about. They have small manufacturing firms that supply large firms. Her research with Mercedes Delgado shows this in spades. And I think that figuring out what the role of your local companies are in global supply chains could be a very useful mapping exercise to understand which clusters you're going to be able to build in your area. And so that'd be the first thing. The second thing I'd say is thinking about strategic plans that other areas like yours have done. If you think about the evaluation points that Brett was talking about, one other point I'd stress is we need a counterfactual. You need a region that looks like yours, that's similar, that didn't have the same kind of investment over this time to compare against. Similarly, on the front end, before receiving funds, it's important to look at the strategic plans of other areas that are like yours to try to model it after those. Now, of course, some of the things will be different. They're in different states, they have different industries, different people. We can learn some of those best practices from other strategic plans as well. And finally, I want to say that rural areas in the United States are often very connected to nearby metros through a variety of different methods, sometimes most notably through transportation networks. And so thinking about your region holistically, comprehensively, and expansively can also have a big impact on how you think about an application. It doesn't necessarily need to define a region just by the borders of your town. In fact, we can think about it in lots of different ways. So I encourage people to work with the EDA team and be creative in how they think about what a region is and what they can build.
So let me emphasize that point. We designed this challenge very purposefully and very intentionally to really leave the definition of regions to each applicant, and that's a game changer in my view, because that's how you're going to bring those coalitions. I'm going to stay with you for a minute, Ronnie, because I think that You also have evaluated many of these place-based programs and the successes of regional clusters. What are some of the specific data points you think about when evaluating which regions will have the best success? Any markers of unsuccessful regions? Like how, and again, this is not determinant of what the Build Back Better applicants will be, but just based on your experience, what have you seen that you would give a recommendation on?
Well, yeah, to your point, as my mom likes to tell me, I'll divide it into successes and not yet successes, because we all have the ability to continue to be successful as we think about these things. But your point's well taken. A couple things. One is the scale of the investment is really important. We can talk about a lot of different things, but in terms of how much initial startup capital goes into a region really matters. And I think for the 1,600 plus people on this call, this is what makes this such a tremendous opportunity, because we're going to get that key factor, which is the amount of funds really accounted for with a large investment, transformational investments through this program. So that's the first thing, I think. The size of the investments, it's really hard to build these clusters with a very small amount of money that doesn't come consistently. The second thing that really matters is the follow-on investment we talked about. That's where those spillovers come from. But the follow-on doesn't happen after the original money is ran out. You have to think about it on the front end. When you're thinking about the application, and this is Brett's point about year 10, year 20, who are going to be the follow-on investors? What is the theory of change after, right, the grant has run its course? And that's a really important thing, I think, the indicators of success, those who are thinking about the future. The third thing I think is really important is multi-sector leadership. If we just try, and this is to Karen's point too, so many of us are going to pick up the phone and call the people we already know, but we're not going to be able to bring a diverse set of stakeholders, both in terms of racial and ethnic backgrounds, but also functional area to the table. And I think that the clusters that do the best are the ones that bring that kind of coalition and get, what Karen used to talk about when she led SBA, alignment. We need alignment from all these different players at the regional level. And so I think those are some characteristics of some of the most successful places I have seen. I think that the more reps you get, just like any athletic endeavor, this is similar, the more reps you get at doing a strategic plan, the more reps you get at taking these grants and turning it into something tangible, the better regions are. They develop the capabilities to do this. And so that experience level helps too. This is where the technical assistance and sort of insights on panels like this can be really helpful for those who are earlier on the process, as well as for the veterans who have done this before.
Yeah. I very much, I want to underscore, you said transformational investment, the follow-on investment, which is critical, the multi-sectoral leadership, and that alignment. How is the region going to align to the needs of the community, and really not just on the technology innovation, entrepreneurship, especially the workforce development, which is going to be the whole ecosystem. So thank you for that. And I want to talk about, Brett, if you don't mind, let's talk about the future of our Build Back Better Regional Challenge applicants. What do you hope these regions take away from their participation in the Build Back Better Regional Challenge for those regions that are selected, and maybe for the ones that are not selected? I think we may.
Oh, you're on mute, Brett.
There we go. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I have high hopes for these applications, and that's in part because I believe in the value of planning as an exercise that can inform local strategy. And so what I really like about this in particular is the two-phased nature of the competition and the process, where groups are first doing the work of planning and coming together, and then those that are merging into the bigger initiative and capital grants. So I would encourage groups to lean into that process and to really think about what value they can get out of planning and how that can lead to greater coordination and better relationships and connections, just like Ronnie was just speaking to, how you can build out your particular strategy, as Karen was alluding to, that's different, but also specific. I think there's some challenge in every, for every government program or philanthropic endeavor that there's a temptation to chase after a grant because it's a grant and it's got money. But I would just underscore the real need to make this grant fit into your plans and your strategy as a local community, and really making it work for you as part of that planning process that really can lead, hopefully, to the next thing.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because I also want to remind the participants that are on this Zoom call to think about the American Rescue Plan and all of the other 5 grants that are available. I know that this conversation is about the Build Back Better Challenge, which the deadline is October 19th. But I also want to remind you that we have the Good Jobs Challenge, which is ongoing, and you can see them on our website. We have the Economic Adjustment Assistance grants as well. We're looking at we've designated $100 million to indigenous communities. Also, some competitive grants available for travel, tourism, and outdoors activities that are made available. So please look at EDA's ARP grants, because just to Brett's point, this may be something that falls squarely and exciting for your communities. But if it isn't, there are other opportunities that EDA has made available to communities across the country. So thank you for that, Brett. Karen, I know we're almost running out of time here, but I want to bring you back and kind of close us out in some ways, more at the macro level. We talk about partnership and collaboration, and sometimes people see it as a zero-sum game in terms of if you get it, I don't. But this grant is all about bringing folks together so that collectively there is an alignment, to use your term, about the different needs of communities. What recommendations would you give when people kind of come into those challenges of not being able to work as closely together in terms of putting together an application for the Build Back Better challenge?
I was listening to Brett and Ronnie just now, and it occurs to me you've done something really smart to make this a competition. Now, I know all of you who are out there competing maybe don't think it's so smart, but the reason is that cluster efforts that have gone awry are when somebody comes in and says, let's have a biotech cluster, or everybody should be, whatever the flavor of the month is. And people rush around trying to, organize around what they think, the government wants at that moment. And that doesn't work. Clusters have to be built on the strength of the region. And Brett just said it, look around and bring to the table people who are already engaged in a plan in building something in your region. But you need assets, you need more funding, you need a bigger and better coalition to get the full job done. And so the task you have is to look into your plans and your activities and build on the assets and the strength you have. Be more inclusive. And there's a couple of folks who I want to just underline who need to be at the table. Small businesses, supplier businesses particularly, but also the small businesses in the community who, are going to get more people coming to their restaurant for lunch. Everybody who has a stake in that asset needs to see how this outcome is going to benefit their region, their community, their street, their business. And the other piece that really always needs to be at the table are the community education activities, whether it's training, retraining, community college, or even the large innovation engines in our research universities. They are a magical secret sauce, and sometimes they don't get in the planning early enough. So creating the right group at the table clearly will make, I think, the application more robust, but it'll make your result better for all the folks in your community.
So let me go around and just any parting words or comments. Thank you for all the nuggets of wisdom that you've shared, as well as insight. I think that this is not just a conversation that has to take place in communities across the country, but it's also important for us to make sure that as we receive applications, we're really taking the pulse of how do we move the country forward in ways that are going to be, one, resilient to the unpredictable changes like a pandemic or like climate change in so many communities, but more importantly, also create that arc towards the future in terms of the technology innovations and new jobs that are going to come down the pike. So, Ronnie, can I start with you? Any last words of information that you would like to share? If there's a document or paper or something that you would refer our attendees to read or evaluate, I welcome that as well.
Well, first, thanks again for hosting this and having this fantastic panel. I think for all the attendees, looking at the documentation that EDA will provide, the website and other materials is a great place to start. It helps to understand all the different deadlines and the criteria, and I think that's as helpful to anything as the applicants could look at. Of course, the work that Brett, Karen, and myself have talked about, research from the world's leading universities and think tanks shows that these regional investments can actually pay dividends. And so I think that's pretty solid. I'm happy if people want to email me for a literature review or even a syllabus. As a professor who's on leave right now, I can provide anything like that as well. I also want to say that the requirements of being a regional leader today are as hard as ever. I mean, we're asking you to have a vision. We're asking you to execute. We're asking you to have patience, but also passion. And I just think for so many people who are listening, we have confidence in you to be able to do this. And hopefully this program will help you lay down a transformative foundation for your region for years to come. And we're happy to play a small role in that. And thanks again for bringing us together, Alejandra.
I want to get these parting words, but we still have some Q&As that I want to entertain. So, Brett, any last minute points that you would give out before we go into a quick Q&A session?
Just very quickly, just to underscore just the chance to be creative here. This is a new opportunity. We've had need, we know we have need, but this is a new opportunity. And I think, new wine calls for some new wine skins. And so I would just encourage people to look at the new and emerging models that are out there and think through how it is that we can really build economic activity in a way that is broadly.
Thank you for that. And Karen, any parting words before we start our Q&A, which I have to say we have over 200 plus, 196 questions, but we'll summarize them. Any words from you, Karen?
Yeah, I have two thoughts. One, to follow on with Ronnie, this is a proven economic path. And I want to shout out my colleague Mercedes Delgado and her work with Michael Porter and others, which proves that if we do this well, we will create economic success, broad economic success, and strong innovation for our country. So it's important to do. And the second thought is a message to those of you who've got your application in front of you and are thinking, is this right? How can I make the best application possible on October 19th? And the thought is, ask yourself this question: what is the outcome that we are trying to achieve? And spend some time to really articulate the economic outcome, the social outcome, to make sure it's inclusive, and see how you would envision the impact that this would have on your region and your community going forward. And then make sure that the path to that outcome is clearly articulated in your application, and how each of the people at the table, each of the groups that you are putting forth in the application are going to contribute together in a consistent way to that outcome. And that, I think, will be able to paint the picture and keep everybody aligned and energized, and maybe make a positive application.
And Karen, thank you for always keeping us in mind in terms of what is the outcome we're trying to drive at. Thank you, everyone, for not only your experience, your comments and guidance, and also for those real life examples that you were able to provide. I'm going to call in my colleague Maria, who's going to help us with some of the questions, because again, as I mentioned, we have over 190 different questions. But let me just say this. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available. I know that the paper that Karen Mills referenced at the beginning of this webinar has been made available. So Maria, do you want to chime in and lead us in the Q&A session?
Happy to. Thank you, Alejandra. One question that's come up for a few of you, especially as you're getting very tactical in some of your applications, is what level of detail should be in my budget or even in my application for phase one? Do I need to have all of my 3 to 8 projects completely detailed out? Alejandra, do you want to take this one?
Sure. In the first phase, we are looking at what is the concept. What to speak to Brett, what is the theory of change? What is it that you're proposing? And to bring back what Karen Mills mentioned, what does that success look like? What is it that you're trying to achieve? That is the first phase. We're looking at much broader concept papers. Some estimations, doesn't have to go all the way down to the penny. We will get to that in the second phase, but at a minimum, give us some understanding and context of the proposal in general.
Thank you. And I will add, obviously there's a technical assistance award part of this application, so we do need those details for what activities we will do with that technical assistance award. But Alejandra is completely correct in saying for those phase 2 projects, we do not need a lot of detail right now. Another question which I'll pose to Ronnie that came up a few times in the chat is, what specific metrics should we be tracking, both to show that we will be successful in the future as a cluster, but also to make sure that our project is successful after these grants have been implemented?
It's really important. It's a good question. I think it's really important to try to track the things that you're used to tracking, which are around jobs and wages and number of certifications or degrees completed. These are kinds of things that we're used to tracking. But I also think it's important to collect some qualitative evidence from folks who are involved in the cluster as well, those who are getting new opportunities that can't always be quantified. Again, I think the other thing to keep track of is thinking about some comparables. Anytime you're evaluating a region or a company or a country, you have to think about what to compare it to. And I think for those who are thinking to establish metrics, think about places that are comparable in terms of industrial mix, population, whatever metrics you think are salient, so we can help establish a baseline to think about, well, if not for this investment, then what? One of the biggest problems with estimating the impact of any kind of regional development program is trying to understand what would happen if that investment was not made. And the best thing you can do to that is to identify some counterfactual or comparable groups that look like your region or city. I think that'd be the most important advice I give you. That, as well as collecting some of that qualitative evidence to sort of add some context and color to the quantitative metrics that you're going to provide. The census and the BEA at Commerce have lots of different data at the regional level that you can look at to benchmark your region in relation to others.
Great, thank you, Ronnie. And I think we're coming up on time. So Alejandra, I'm actually going to turn it back to you. Unfortunately, we didn't get to everyone's questions, but we've been trying to answer them in the chat as we go. But just wanted to say thank you all for your participation. And of course, we have an email that you can put further questions to. That's buildbackbetter@eda.gov. Please send in any additional questions to that email.
Maria, thank you very much. And I know everybody is bombarded with different types of virtual meetings these days, but this was very informative, and I hope it was of great help to the participants who are here. We are excited. We know that this is a big undertaking. It's a quick turnaround in some ways, but more importantly, this is an opportunity to think boldly, to think big, as our panelists have mentioned in numerous occasions. And at the end of the day, it's how are you going to transform with your proposal the regions that you're in to make sure that growth and economic development is both equitable and inclusive, but also with a vision towards the future, not just 5 years down the line, but 10 and 20 years down the line. I want to take this moment to yet again thank Karen Mills, always a good friend and partner of EDA in all of her different capacities. Ronnie, thank you for the work that you do on behalf of the Department of Commerce and helping us with the different metrics and looking at the work that we do with a lens towards not just impact, but also the policy implications. And Brett, thank you for the work that you do at the Urban Institute. I know that EDA has been a partner of the Urban Institute and looking forward to a continued partnership. With that, I will close this session and just say that This is going to, not only has it been recorded, but it will be made available to you all shortly. And as Maria mentioned, there is an email address that you can continue to send your questions to. I wish you all a very safe Friday, and continue to look at EDA as partnerships, but also as we continue to invest in communities all across America. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it very much.